This hour on I-24 News.
I think it's a disgrace. What's going on in this country, I think it's a disgrace.
President Trump released the memo he says shows anti-Republican bias at the FBI. Plus, the man at the center of the memo, who is Christopher Steele. Also, millions of dollars for 30 seconds of airtime, the big business behind Super Bowl ads. And the toys of King Tut, when the ancient Egyptian artifacts will go on display.
From the I-24 News Studios in Times Square in New York, this is Clearcut with Michelle McCory.
Welcome to the program. After weeks of political posturing and debate, the controversial and formally classified Nunes memo is now in the open. But its release hasn't stopped the debate. Republicans say the memo shows bias at the top levels of the FBI and Justice Department. Democrats call it a political ploy to protect the president from a criminal investigation. And the FBI says it's not accurate. Correspondent Lana Zak has the details.
It was declassified, and let's see what happens. But a lot of people should be ashamed.
President Trump, against the recommendation of his own FBI director, declassified a controversial memo written by Republican members of the House Intelligence Committee. The memo posted this afternoon is critical of Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and others for their roles in renewing a surveillance warrant on former Trump campaign aide Carter Page. At its crux, the memo argues that the FBI and Department of Justice used information from Christopher Steele's unsubstantiated dossier to renew their FISA surveillance warrant against Page without disclosing that the dossier was paid for in part by the Clinton campaign.
This dossier was the foundational basis for spying on American citizens.
Democrats in the committee have charged that the memo cherry-picks facts and critiques the chair, Devin Nunes, a Trump ally, for releasing misleading allegations, calling it a shameful effort to discredit these institutions, undermine the special counsel's ongoing investigation, and undercut congressional probes. And former FBI Director James Comey tweets, "That's it. Dishonest and misleading memo wrecked the House Intel Committee, destroyed trust with intelligence community, damaged relationship with FISA court, and inexcusably exposed classified investigation of an American citizen. For what? DOJ and FBI must keep doing their jobs." Critics charge that this is all an effort to compromise the special counsel Robert Mueller and the one man who could fire him, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. The president was asked if the memo makes him more likely to fire Rosenstein.
You figure that one out.
That was Lana Zak reporting. Let's bring in senior Washington correspondent Dan Raviv and senior national correspondent Michael Shore. Michael, let's start with you. What stood out to you the most after reading the Nunes memo? What's your headline for today?
You know, it's hard to say. My headline for today was not what I thought it would be. I think that this memo was, fell a little bit flat. Maybe that's the problem when you build something up so much. But as you looked at this memo and you squared it with what we knew beforehand, what we knew about the history of Fusion GPS, about Christopher Steele, about the motivation behind going after Carter Page and the timing of that, there wasn't anything new that came up today. I think the fact that this continues to muddy the water about whether or not there was collusion or at least cooperation at some point with Russians during the campaign, maybe that helps the president a little bit. But the headline to me today is that there wasn't enough in this memo to make it a game changer in any kind of a way, Tal.
And Dan Raviv, the president said following the release, as we saw, that many people should be ashamed. Who exactly was he referring to?
He said it's a disgrace. Yeah, he means some people in the FBI and near the top of the Department of Justice. And he specifically means before he took office, the Barack Obama Department of Justice, which you recall nearly a year ago, Donald Trump accused Barack Obama of eavesdropping, wiretapping the Trump campaign in Trump Tower. Later, Trump said, I don't mean exactly wiretapping, but there they are right now, back to evidence that someone at least who worked for the Trump campaign, his name Carter Page, was the subject of surveillance by American intelligence agencies. And so, well, we have some evidence of that now. So the Republicans, in fact, say, and you can see in this memo, this is it, and there's the word unclassified because President Trump decided to get it out there. Trump and the Republicans say because it wasn't right and proper, the way the surveillance warrant to keep an ear on Carter Page was obtained, that questions everything the FBI and the Department of Justice did for the sake of surveillance, claiming it's about Russia collusion. Now, is this really the whole heart of the case? Is this really what Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller is going after? Is Carter Page even that important? Probably not, but the Republicans found something here, perhaps a chink in the armor of the Mueller investigation, so that the Republicans, are trying to undermine it, Tal.
And Dan, what does the memo say about Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein? Do we have a solid reason to believe that the president may fire him?
Yeah, if you're just kind of logical, early in the memo, it talks about the fact that 4 times the special court, known as the FISA court, granted permission to mount surveillance on Carter Page, meaning he was suspected to be a Russian agent. Well, anyway, who applied for the permission each time? They're named here as though a gallery of villains as far as the Republicans are concerned. First, James Comey, when he was head of the FBI. Well, he's gone. He was fired by Trump last year. Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, he was forced out only about a week ago. Sally Yates, the Deputy Attorney General under Obama, Trump fired her a year ago. And then it says Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenblatt. He might be, Rosenstein. Rosenstein might be next in line to be fired. He might be, Tal.
And speaking about forcing people out, Michael, what happens to FBI Director Christopher Wray now?
Well, that's really up to him for the moment. There was speculation that he said if this was released, he would step down. This afternoon, he spoke to his troops. He sent a letter, issued a letter of support, with no indication that he was going anywhere. Tal, he said, talk is cheap. The work you do is what will endure. We speak through our work one day at a time. Remember, keep calm. Tackle hard. Thank you for standing strong together. These are not the words that you would hear necessarily from somebody who is stepping down from his position. It wasn't a bad day for the FBI. The part that was troublesome, if you're Wray, is that he was not listened to by the White House here. He urged that this not be released, and it was released. It's up to him whether or not he stays, and for the moment, it appears that he is going to stay. There's a lot more work for Chris Wray to do in the weeks going forward. There are places where he can make his stand more profoundly later on. Certainly, were Mueller to hand down any indictments later on, and I think Chris Wray wants to stick around for that, Tal.
Michael, we know that the Democrats are not allowed to publish their own memo at this point, the Schiff one, but what can you tell us about the response to the Nunes memo and the fact that it has been released?
Well, I think the important thing is, since the release of Devin Nunes' memo and the memo of the majority of the Intelligence Committee that was so controversial, I think now the White House is saying, yes, release the Democratic memo. Even the Speaker's office, Paul Ryan's office this afternoon, saying, yes, go ahead and release that memo. But it's not up to them. It's up to the Intelligence Committee themselves. They have voted not to, and they would have to have another vote that says to release it. At this point, the Democrats are getting a lot of mileage, it seems, by the fact that the media, at least, is making this out to seem like a lot less. Their next move, though, is to make sure that when they go to the FISA judges, which they will certainly do, the FISA judges are there to say, yes, we did not go alone on the information that was provided in the dossier. We wanted to go after this because we saw other reasons to do it. You remember 95% of FISA memos are granted, or FISA taps and wirings are granted, and so it was not unusual that this happened. The Republicans, for their part, you've heard John McCain and Trey Gowdy, who's in the House of Representatives, vociferously saying that there wasn't enough, wasn't really very much in the Nunes memo, and McCain was upset with the release, upset with the White House for having released it, and he's in Arizona recovering, hopefully, from his cancer. And I think that there's a lot of feeling that maybe this was a little bit too much of a play on the part of Republicans right now. Democrats are going to try and take advantage of that.
Michael Shore and Dan Raviv, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And at the center of the Nunes memo is the former British spy who wrote the anti-Trump dossier on Donald Trump. But just who is Christopher Steele? Our New York Bureau Chief Steve Langford has the reminder.
Christopher Steele, born in Yemen and raised in the UK, the former British spy, a veteran of operations from targeting the Taliban out of Bagram airfield in Afghanistan to investigating the mysterious poisoning death of Russian intelligence officer Alexander Litvinenko. But it is the dossier Steele compiled on what he called Donald Trump's activities in Russia and compromising relationship with the Kremlin that has made Christopher Steele an unending focus of fascination and fury.
I'm really pleased to be back here working again.
Steele saying that and nothing more after coming out of hiding last March as he returned to work at his company, Orbis Business Intelligence in London, following the explosive release of his secret dossier on Donald Trump's relationship with Moscow.
It's all fake news. It's phony stuff. It didn't happen.
The Steele dossier, financed by the Democratic National Committee and lawyers for Hillary Clinton, was eventually passed on to U.S. intelligence. Senator John McCain said to have provided a copy of the Steele dossier to then FBI Director James Comey in December 2016, while Steele's information also became part of the justification for the surveillance warrant targeting former Trump advisor Carter Page. Steele's signature piece of intelligence gathering and just how reliable and credible it is, something that may ultimately be judged only by Donald Trump, Robert Mueller, and history.
Here's a thing that have been crossing my mind. We are here in the news reporting all these latest developments in the Russia investigation, about the memo, about the dossier, and I'm just wondering what sticks with the American public after all. What are people remembering? What's the main takeaway from all these developments? And now, joining me now to further discuss all these developments is Eric Chase, a criminal defense attorney. He is live in Los Angeles tonight for us. The president says this memo was declassified because of high public interest. His opponents say that these are mainly Trump's interests. What is your view?
Well, when I first read this memo, it read to me like a very poorly written suppression motion. I'm a criminal defense attorney. I write a lot of suppression motions, and that's what this is. They're saying that the person who gave some information had some bias, therefore the warrant shouldn't have been issued. And frankly, it's not even well written. Any judge anywhere would throw this out with a chuckle. You know what the memo doesn't have in it? It doesn't have information about what the actual facts were. What was it that Steele told them? What was the information they had on Carter Page that led the FBI to believe not that he was colluding with the Russians to help the Trump to help the Trump candidacy, but that he was actually a Russian infiltrator of the Trump candidacy? That's what the FBI was concerned about at the time. They weren't concerned about the collusion. They were concerned about infiltration. What was the evidence they had? It's not in the memo at all.
So quickly explain to us the FISA process. What does it take to get a warrant?
Well, the FISA process is very similar to getting a regular warrant in a regular criminal case. The only real difference, aside from procedural, is the privacy. They have to present to the judge that they have probable cause to believe that the subject of the warrant is either engaged in criminal activity or will disclose evidence of criminal activity. That's what they have to show the judge. And I think that if we actually saw the warrant, we would see that there was overwhelming evidence that Carter Page was involved with the GRU, the Russian intelligence service, in trying to infiltrate the Trump candidacy for the benefit of the Russian government. That was the information that they presented.
So when you say overwhelming, you mean more than just the dossier?
Of course there was more than just the dossier. And I think that's what the Democrats are kind of telegraphing to us in the preparation for their memo is, hey, they left out all this other information. You know, part of being on the criminal defense side, which is what the Republicans are doing here, is muddying the waters. You throw the papers up in the air and then complain that they landed a mess on the ground. That's all this is. And I think when we see the reality of what was in that FISA warrant, there's going to be no concern at all about the probable cause that Carter Page was involved with the Russians.
Let me ask you this. If you are Robert Mueller, what are you thinking about this memo? What is your next move, and what are you worried about now?
Well, I think what Robert Mueller is mostly worried about is getting fired. And I've been thinking about this a lot. What's he going to do? How's he going to react to this? Because he knows that the real purpose of this is to try and stop the investigation. And so we may actually see him speed up and file indictments more quickly, because that's one way to protect what he's doing, and I know that he sees what he's doing is protecting the American public. And he can do that best by filing indictments as quickly as possible.
So you say this memo presents a pretty common defense tactic, attack the investigators. Can you explain that?
Oh, absolutely, and we see that in lots of cases. That was the O.J. defense, right? Because Mark Fuhrman used the N-word, all this overwhelming evidence of O.J.'s guilt, don't look at that, ignore that. Let's look at the evidence that the investigator had once used the N-word. This is exactly the same thing. You know, there's overwhelming evidence of the Russian infiltration of the Trump campaign, starting with Paul Manafort, who was an agent for Yanukovych in the Ukraine, who was an agent for Vladimir Putin for 7 years and got tens of millions of dollars. Of course the Russians infiltrated the Trump campaign. And what this tactic is, you don't look at that, ignore that. And let's look at the fact that one person who gave one piece of evidence at one time said, I don't like Donald Trump.
I want to ask you just briefly, when do you think this will wrap up, the entire Russia investigation? Just briefly, a time estimation for us.
Well, wrap up is tough. I'm hoping that the next indictments come out within the next 2 to 3 months. Wrap up is going to be years.
We will write it down. Criminal defense attorney Eric Chase, thank you for your time. And still ahead here on Clearcut, taking his case to the United Nations. Again, what can you expect when Mahmoud Abbas speaks with the Security Council this month? In the fear of the U.S., the Russian government has a warning for the oligarchs they added to the new blacklist.
Stories. Stories that touch your heart and open your eyes. Stories that take you on a journey and show you something you will never forget. Look through the lens and see what others see. High definition, documentaries and discussions that connect us all. Join Lauren Izzo at 10:03 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
I'm David Schuster.
And I'm Shayna Stulin.
Join us on I-24 News for our show Crossroads.
We bring you a comprehensive
and engaging
look at the global news and opinions from the crossroads of America.
Weeknights beginning at 6 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
I-24 News.
Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas is not taking President Trump's Jerusalem declaration lying down. He's set to address the United Nations this month and stake his claim to the city. I-24 News senior Middle East correspondent Mohammed Al-Qassem reports.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is taking his case to the United Nations again. Abbas will give a speech later this month to the Security Council, setting the stage for a showdown with the Americans and the Israelis on the floor of the world body. Kuwait, the incoming president of the Security Council in February, invited Abbas.
It will be a good thing for the members of the Security Council to listen to the president himself. It will be beneficial for all.
This comes at a time where relations between Washington and Ramallah at their lowest point in decades, following President Donald Trump's controversial announcement late last year, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. The decision infuriated Abbas, who said the U.S. is no longer a trusted mediator.
We do not accept America as mediator between us and Israel.
The Palestinian Authority cut off all communications with the U.S., and Abbas boycotted U.S. Vice President Mike Pence's recent visit to the region, electing instead to attend an EU meeting in Brussels, which in turn enraged Trump.
When they disrespected us a week ago by not allowing our great vice president to see them, and we give them hundreds of millions of dollars in aid and support, tremendous numbers.
The speech at the UNSC is part of President Abbas's campaign for an international conference on the conflict. Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danon, accused Abbas of seeking to put an end to any possibility of negotiations with Israel, saying, by continuing to act against the United States and seeking unilateral action against Israel, Abbas is completely misreading today's reality and harming the prospects for a better future for his people. Trump promised he will make history and achieve the ultimate deal between Israelis and Palestinians. But with all parties entrenched in their positions, it seems that at this point, his promise may ultimately remain unfulfilled. Hamad Al-Qasim, I-24 News.
Let's bring in Nizar Farsak. He's a former advisor to Palestinian leadership. Thank you for joining us. President Abbas will address the Security Council on February 20th. He has delivered speeches at the United Nations in the past, but this time around, given all the tensions between the Trump administration and the Palestinians, what do you think his main message will be?
His main message will be definitely for the Security Council and the international system to take stewardship of the process, given that the U.S. has reneged its leadership and stewardship of the process by recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital. So I think it's a preemptive strike, or trying to put the onus back at the Security Council and the international system to take the stewardship of the process.
Just a few weeks ago, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, spoke specifically about Abbas at the Security Council. She more or less described him there as a non-partner for peace, after he said that the Oslo Accord is dead in the Ramallah speech and that the U.S. can no longer be a legitimate mediator in the peace talks. Do you genuinely believe that Abbas is committed to the peace process?
Definitely, he's committed indeed, right? So and ever since 1974, in fact, he was committed to a two-state solution, and he has been committed to a diplomatic solution. He's the one who actually signed the Oslo Accords in the Washington, in the White House lawn. And since he was president, he was committed to a diplomatic process and putting diplomatic pressure and using international arenas to put pressure on Israel, and he was critical of the use of violence. So he is dedicated to the process, for sure.
Abbas is in a very tough position, I find. The peace process with Israel is stalled, and so are the reconciliation attempts with Hamas, and the United States is cutting aid to his people. If he wants to stay a relevant leader in the eyes of the Palestinians and the Arab world entirely, he has to deliver something. Do you think the same? Can you talk to us about his popularity among Palestinians right now?
Indeed, I mean, that's the case. He has a constituency. He's answerable to that constituency. And when the U.S. president or the U.S. administration takes a categorical position stating that they are completely in the Israeli camp and that they are they've reneged their role as an honest broker, he needs to take, Abbas, that is, President Abbas needs to take steps to show that he is going to move forward in some other direction to make sure that Palestinians secure their rights, given that now the political situation has changed. So definitely he's doing this because he has a platform and he needs to deliver on that platform.
But can you understand the Trump administration position? If you are taking our dollars, our money, you have to comply with our interests?
Well, that's actually a common misconception. The aid to the Palestinians came with the Oslo process because the Palestinian Authority is actually not sovereign. And in order for it to deliver services to the Palestinians, which are services that Israel as an occupying power is responsible for, the PA requires or needs certain aid. Therefore, the aid is not pay to play as some people try to frame it. It's in fact part of the peace process, just as much as Egypt and Jordan and Israel, for that matter, get aid given that they have a peace agreement with each other.
Nizar Farsak, former advisor to Palestinian leadership, thank you for your time and these insights. And coming up here on Clearcut, a warning from Russia why Putin's government is telling some of its citizens not to travel outside the country.
I'm David Schuster on I-24 News. Join us on Stateside. It's our channel's flagship broadcast, and it features our best reporting and analysis of news from around the world and from here in the United States.
Watch Stateside, weeknights at 9 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Strictly Security. Your weekly look into security, intelligence, and strategic affairs. Our team brings the latest on the major international conflicts. Analysis of the major security issues right here in the Middle East and around the globe. Join us for a close look at innovative military technology and get up to speed with what's happening in cyberspace. Saturdays, 5:05 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
What you need to know, the news, fast and to the point, and the in-depth interviews that will keep you in your seat from the people that you trust. I-24 News presents The New Rundown every Monday through Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Co-hosted by Nurit Ben and Kalev Ben David. Only on I-24 News.
Israel, the Middle East, the world. Get your daily dose every morning on I-24 News. News from around the world to around the corner. Jeff Smith brings you the top stories, the hard news, and analysis you need to know. Weekday mornings at 7:05 a.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Welcome back to Clearcut. Russian citizens are under a travel warning, alerting them to the dangers of going abroad. But that didn't stop a high-ranking Russian operative from meeting with American officials on U.S. soil. Senior defense correspondent Shai Ben-Ari has the details.
These days, if you're Russian, you may very well be confused over exactly where you can and can't go. The Russian Foreign Ministry issued the following travel warning on Thursday to its own citizens.
Despite our calls to improve cooperation between the relevant US and Russian authorities, US Special Services have effectively continued hunting for Russians around the world. Considering these circumstances, we strongly insist that Russian citizens carefully weigh up all the risks when planning trips abroad.
The statement notes that in 2017 alone, more than 10 Russian citizens were arrested following requests from the U.S. government in such countries as Spain, Latvia, Canada, and Greece. Some of these cases involved individuals suspected of cybercrime. The statement also mentioned former Russian pilot Konstantin Yaroshenko, who it says was, quote, illegally abducted in Liberia. He is currently doing 20 years in a New Jersey prison for drug smuggling. But beyond criminals and possible agents, a range of different high-ranking Russian officials are targets of U.S. sanctions.
This is all intended to put pressure on that government and hold them responsible for not only meddling in our elections, which, by the way, let me mention, there are lots of reports about Russia meddling in other countries' elections as well.
But it seems those sanctions are flexible. This is Sergei Naryshkin. He is the head of Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service. In 2014, he was placed on a U.S. sanctions blacklist by the Obama administration. According to Russian state media, Naryshkin met with American counterparts last week near Washington, despite those sanctions.
We have the ability to waive that so that people can come into the United States. It is no secret that despite our many, many differences, and we just talked about them with the Russian government, we also have areas where we have to work together. And one of those is combating terrorism and ISIS.
It appears that when it comes to U.S.-Russia relations, little can be taken at face value. Shai Ben-Ari, I-24 News.
And still ahead on Clearcut, the Saudi coalition. New reports about civilian casualties in Yemen, how it's taking a toll on the population there. And the war in Syria. Turkey expands their fight against the U.S.-backed Kurds. Those stories and more when Clearcut continues in just 60 seconds.
In the Holy Land, there are wonders most people never get to see. I-24 News will take you inside the shadows and unravel the secrets of some of the world's most revered sites in a way you've never experienced. All access from every angle. Tune in to Sacred Sites 360, Sunday 9 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
go beyond the headlines every day on I-24 News. Host Ami Kaufman talks to the news makers and pundits to bring you the story behind the headlines. The Spin Room with Ami Kaufman, only on I-24 News.
Welcome back to Clearcut. I'm Tal Heinrich in for Michelle McCory today. Now let's get you caught up on some of the stories making headlines in your Middle East minutes. The Turkish-backed Free Syrian Army is attacking Kurdish YPG fighters in Syria. This is Turkish government video uploaded today. Turkey launched Operation Olive Branch nearly 2 weeks ago to target Kurdish YPG fighters. The U.S.-backed militias are seen as a terrorist group by Turkey. Clashes between Palestinians and Israeli forces in the West Bank city of El Bira. Protests accused Israeli forces of invading the neighborhood, closing roads and treating it as an army camp. Tensions are high in the region since President Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Iran is cracking down on women refusing to wear hijabs. At least 29 women have been arrested for violating the country's headscarf law. They're charged with disturbing public security. The mandatory headscarf rule has been in place since Iran's Islamic Revolution in 1979. And still in the region, the ongoing war in Yemen escalated this week as separatists surrounded the presidential palace in Aden. And now a new report by the United Nations is shedding light on the number of children's deaths that can be blamed on the Saudi-led coalition. A warning, you may find some of the video you're about to see hard to watch. Here's I-24 News correspondent Marcus White's report.
These images show the ongoing violence in Yemen's civil war. The country has been devastated by fighting between forces supportive of President Abdallah Mansour Hadi and those who support the Houthi rebel movement. The UN's Children's Aid Agency, UNICEF, says more than 5,000 children have been killed or injured in the war. That's an average of 5 children a day. Late last year, 256 schools were destroyed and nearly 24 were occupied by armed groups. The war has an even more profound impact on the disabled and sick. 6-year-old Zawar Gabran has been disabled since she was born, and she's in constant pain.
I don't have anything, and I see her not sleeping at night. She does not sleep. She just sits until the morning comes. I'm calling on the international organizations and the state to help me take her to the hospital.
Zawar lives in a displacement camp where there's no access to medical treatment. Many of the disabled wish that they could get crutches or a wheelchair.
There is no money to treat them, so they have to accept the status quo and live without treatment.
8 million people are suffering from near-famine conditions in Yemen, according to the United Nations. The situation is so troubling, hundreds of Yemenis living near a garbage dump in the western part of the nation scavenge for food, eating and drinking what they can. This young boy says he collects plastic and sells it for money. 2 million children in Yemen are dealing with acute malnutrition, according to the UN. It's a condition that can be deadly. Yemen is also battling diphtheria, a serious bacterial infection. Earlier this month, the advocacy organization Save the Children said 52 people have died from the disease since August. Many of the deaths were people under the age of 15. Yemen also continues to suffer from a cholera epidemic. Millions have been infected and more than 2,000 people have been killed. But despite the battles for the disabled, the hungry, and those with cholera and diphtheria, help has begun to arrive. Just last week, 90 tons of aid was delivered. But there's still no end in sight to the devastation in Yemen, described by the UN as one of the worst man-made humanitarian crises in the world. Marcus White, I-24 News.
For more, let's bring in Craig Seidner, President and CEO of the World Affairs Snyder. I'm sorry about that. President and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia. Well, you saw this report by the United Nations. It described the situation in Yemen as the worst man-made humanitarian crisis in the world right now. We know there are terrible places around the world to be, like Syria, for example. Can you describe to us what it means for the everyday lives of the Yemeni citizens?
Well, the entire population, 27 million people, virtually all of them are in danger of starving at this point. There are estimates that as many as 20 million people could face true famine conditions within the next couple of months if the Saudi blockade is not lifted and transportation of food into the country restored through the ports. So you're talking about, first there was the cholera epidemic, and now this famine. I mean, these are biblical plagues essentially being visited deliberately as a matter of policy on a country in the 21st century. It's unspeakable.
Children are dying there every day, and aid is not trickling in?
There's very little way for aid to get in because of the blockade of the ports and the disruption of air travel, because the Saudi coalition is conducting a major air bombing campaign. So there's just no way for aid workers, despite their best intention, to distribute water and food around the country.
There's another thing that the UN report also mentions, and that is the recruitment of children in Yemen to fight, and that has increased. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, we've seen the issue of child soldiers elsewhere in civil war conditions, particularly in Africa. This is perhaps the first time we're seeing it on a large scale in an Arab country, but it's a matter of desperation. When you have families unable to feed themselves, any out that allows you to get any resources into the home is going to be taken, including essentially selling your children into service.
Does the war in Yemen seem to end anytime soon?
Very unlikely, because this is basically a proxy war between the Saudi coalition and the Iranians for control of the wider Middle East. And the world community, particularly the United States, in fear of Iranian influence, in fear of the Iranians becoming a kind of regional superpower, have been willing to let the Saudis and the Emiratis continue this struggle as long as it takes.
What is how would you describe the American intervention in Yemen? We know that there have been certain airstrikes, American airstrikes in Yemen, but the U.S. interests are mainly Al-Qaeda there and ISIS.
Yes, direct U.S. involvement has been very limited. Basically, when particular high-value targets in the terrorist infrastructure are identified, the U.S. will go after them. But primarily, our role there has been as a political supporter and as an arms merchant to the Saudis and the Emiratis.
Do you feel like this war in Yemen is getting less spotlight from the world, from the media, from...
Very much so. This is, as you said, growing into the largest humanitarian crisis in the entire world, and I think it's very little noticed. There's really no way for journalists to get in and cover it, so we don't have much video. And the political situation with the United States basically backing the Saudis has meant that there's not a lot of discussion about it, but there certainly should be. Because whatever the geopolitical issues and stakes are in the region, and obviously that's important, we can't sacrifice the population of an entire country to that geopolitical struggle.
I also think that it's very hard to follow the developments there on the ground, because the alliances keep shifting all the time, and so many foreign elements are involved. You mentioned Iran and Saudi Arabia, but also the United Arab Emirates and the Houthis. But we need to remind everyone that in the case of Yemen, it's not like this country has been unified forever, right? Do you think that this country will be unified once again? It has been gone through 3 civil wars in just 4 decades?
Very unlikely that the Yemeni state that existed before this war broke out will remain intact. Much more likely you're going to have an Iranian-dominated region and a Sunni-dominated region. But what we saw in the last week was a sort of war within a war, where the various Sunni elements between the south and the north were fighting each other in the temporary capital of Aden.
Thank you so much for all these insights and information that are sometimes, all these details are overlooked, as you said. Craig Snyder, CEO of the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia. And still ahead on Clearcut, dried out. Cape Town is running out of water. The new steps the government is taking to ease the pressure. And it's the biggest TV event of the year. What companies hope to get from those high-priced Super Bowl ads. Your business news is next.
Israel, the Middle East, the world. Get your daily dose every morning on I-24 News. News from around the world to around the corner. Jeff Smith brings you the top stories, the hard news, and analysis you need to know. Weekday mornings at 7:05 a.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
What you need to know, the news, fast and to the point, and the in-depth interviews that will keep you in your seat from the people that you trust. I-24 News presents The New Rundown every Monday through Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, co-hosted by Nurit Ben and Kalev Ben David. Only on I-24 News.
올림픽 화이팅입니다.
Look at the Nasdaq building here in Times Square. It was one of the worst days for U.S. stocks in 2 years. Investors are concerned the Federal Reserve could increase interest rates sooner than expected. The Nasdaq dropped almost 2%. The Dow fell 665 points, more than 2.5%, and the S&P was down more than 2%. And here in the U.S., we're heading into Super Bowl weekend, and the craze has taken over the host city, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Correspondent Maggie Rulli is there ahead of Sunday's big game.
I'm thinking about the Super Bowl and trying to win the most important game of the year.
We want it for the fans just as bad as they want it. So, you know, we're all in this together.
The players may be ready for game day, but is Minneapolis, the country's northernmost Super Bowl location, is bracing for more than 1 million visitors leading up to kickoff, and for temps that are 20 degrees below average, dipping down to the single digits even midday.
Hands are cold, your cheeks freeze.
Fans are spending from $3,000 to $22,000 on tickets.
Once in a lifetime, especially the Eagles are here, so have to do it.
Minneapolis Super Bowl planners say this is their chance to show off the city's Minnesota pride. 10,000 tickets for the Bold North zipline already sold out. Kids are testing their football skills at NFL Experience. And local restaurants are churning out Super Bowl feasts, offering late hours, special discounts, and themed parties.
We've been talking about this for over a year with our employees, and I mean, yeah, this is going to be a moment we are going to look back and remember our whole lives.
Super Bowl planners say, on average, each person will spend nearly $2,500 while they're in town. As for the players, well, they just seem excited to be here.
I am feeling the superpowers right now. He said if I told anybody what kind of powers I had, they'd probably disappear.
That was Maggie Rulli reporting. Of course, millions are being spent on the Super Bowl this weekend, and that brings us to tonight's notable number. $5 million. That's what 30-second commercial will cost advertisers this year. The ads are expected to reach an audience of more than 100 million viewers. Of course, ad agencies have been cooking up their best ideas, from the inspiring to the dramatic and, of course, the ridiculous. Take a look.
Are we winning? No. See, it's so small from back here. I can't really tell.
It's the Bud Night.
It's the Bud Night. We're saved. Yes. Dilly dilly!
Time to do what must be done. I did it.
It's going to be a fun weekend, isn't it? Joining me now is Hillary Fordwich, president and founder of Strelmark Business Development Consultants. She's a marketing and branding expert. Hillary, $5 million for a 30-second spot. Is it really worth it for the brand exposure?
Well, Tal, absolutely, or companies wouldn't continue to advertise on the Super Bowl. Most years it's sold out actually by November. So here's a way of looking at it. Just do the math. $5 million sounds like a lot of money, but we're going to have about 111 to 115 million Americans watching on Sunday. So a regular ad on a regular show, say a Tuesday night sitcom, that only costs $200,000 to $300,000, but that ends up being about 10 cents or more per viewer, because there's only about 11 million people watching. If you do the math on Super Bowl Sunday, it's only going to cost 4 to 5 cents when you have 150 million watchers. So yes. Secondly, as you know, Tal, during most commercials, what do? We go do the laundry, we mute it, we use the bathroom. But this Sunday, everyone's going to be watching. So you almost can't buy that attention. How much can you spend for that attention? The Super Bowl ads get attention. And last but not least, it's the longevity. It's how we talk about it. Monday morning talk shows and Monday morning around the water cooler, people are going to be talking about certain aspects of certain ads. We all remember special ads like, you know, where's the beef, or certain catchphrases. And I think that's going to be the big difference. It's the longevity, it's the attention, and it's the cost per viewer is actually low.
It's definitely the attention. It's a good point you got there. But is it about return on investment, or is it more of a prestige thing for these companies?
Well, you know, Tal, it can be a combination. Some companies, it's prestige, for example, almost like a defensive move. I mean, if Pepsi and Bud don't have an ad, I mean, you don't want to be the first CMO at Budweiser or Pepsi to say, we're not going to take a Super Bowl ad this year, and have your neck on the line for any decrease in sales. So for some companies, it's actually more of a defensive move. For other companies, when you talk about prestige, oh yes, this is something that their entire company can rally around, and or it is a motive in front of the nation. The whole nation is watching. So yes, there's a tremendous amount of prestige, not just necessarily the ROI in terms of sales, but in terms of brand awareness as well.
These big advertisements, they usually leak out the week before on the internet. Is it part of the strategy?
Oh, yes, you hit that right. It is absolutely part of the strategy. I mean, look already. You've already shown that Bud Light ad, so you've already shown it. Think about in 2011, The Force. Everybody remembers that cute little boy with his Darth Vader outfit, and he was doing his tricks going around the house with his washing machine, and to his mother the sandwich. That had 7 million views even before that 2011 Super Bowl. So yes, there is an entire strategy to leaking a little bit of information first. This year, Danny DeVito has already been leaked, surrounded in chocolate. Who doesn't want to take a peek at Danny DeVito swimming in chocolate as an M&M?
Have you seen any other ad that you think is going to get buzz past Sunday's game and into Monday morning's talk shows, as you said?
Yes. Yes, I do think one actually that hits the mark. I think this year's a little bit different, Tal, because this nation is so polarized at the moment. We've had a lot of controversy around the NFL. Ratings have been sliding. It's about 10% off in ratings. So there's a lot of controversy and a lot more issues this year. So I think a lot of the ads are going to be lighter. They're going to avoid any sort of political statement. But there is one ad in particular I've seen that is very emotive. And I think this is going to actually move a lot of people in our nation. And I think it's going to be talked about on Monday. And that is, yet again, Budweiser has done it. I think it's the ironically, the absence of something will get some buzz. There's an absence of the Clydesdale horses. They're not going to be on this year. Instead, Budweiser has an actual, almost like a mini, tiny documentary about their stopping production to switch to water and what Budweiser actually did for Texas, for Florida, California, and Puerto Rico in sending water instead. It's emotive. It tells a story. It's beautiful music. It's a Stand By Me, but it's Stand By You. And I think that, Tal, will have some conversation on Monday. And it's definitely emotive. And the key to a successful ad on Super Bowl Sunday is, can you make the audience want, the key is want to do something with your product, want to buy your product? I think a lot of people who maybe didn't drink Bud before are going to say, now that's a good company. And the next time they're ordering a beer, they'll say, you know, a beer's a beer. I think I'll go with that company that did help Florida, California, Puerto Rico, and Texas, because maybe I personally couldn't, but now I can do something.
Hillary Fordwich, I will definitely reminisce about this interview with you during my watch of the Super Bowl. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thank you, Tal. Thank you.
And still ahead, King Tut's Toys, the historic find, and when the Boy King's collection will go on display.
I'm Tracy Alexander for I24 News. Join us on Perspectives and get the whole picture as we break down the day's top stories from all angles.
I24 News.
Fearless, timely, and always engaging. Every night, David Schuster brings the news from around the world to your front door. Watch Stateside, weeknights at 9 p.m. Eastern, only on I24 News.
Welcome back to Clearcut. Artists who've had to flee their homeland because of either poverty or war are finding a safe haven in Paris. Culture correspondent Maya Murgui takes a look at an art studio geared especially towards refugees and asylum seekers.
It was once the world's capital for high culture, Paris, the city of lights. Now it's opening its doors to a new wave of talent, Syrian refugee artists. Like Lina, a 35-year-old woman from the war-ravaged city of Hama. She's part of a record number of immigrants seeking asylum in France. And now her art is on display at the prestigious Grand Palais Royal, along with the works of 14 other artists in exile.
I think it would have been difficult to stay in Syria, depending on where you were. If you were in Damascus, it would have been very hard to work freely and have freedom of expression. You could get arrested or killed. I have two homelands. There's Syria, which is a very big part of my life, and there's France. In Paris especially, I've learned a lot from it. I've become a much stronger person, someone who's self-reliant.
Lina paints here, at this large studio in Paris, that 150 exiled artists from around the world use as their dedicated workspace. Judith, who runs the atelier, believes immigrants and refugees can help re-energize Paris's contemporary art scene.
We have a lot of great exiled artists in French culture, so it's about time that tradition is renewed. Art and French culture have a lot to learn from this melting pot, from this contribution of other cultures.
Fleeing war, poverty, and persecution, these artists hope fine art can help bring them a new lease on life. Maya Murgui, I24 News.
And as we wrap up the show, let's take a look at some headlines from around the globe in our World Wrap. In France, a deadly mid-air collision. Two French military training helicopters collided over the southeastern Var region. 5 people were killed in the accident. No immediate details on what caused the crash. In Argentina, some 10,000 local residents had to be evacuated due to heavy rains and flooding. There's been at least 1 death. The river is expected to continue rising over the next 4 days. The severe drought in Cape Town has led to water rationing. Residents are being ordered not to use more than 50 liters of water per person per day. Hotels have asked guests not to take baths, only short showers. Authorities are worried the city's taps could run dry by mid-April. And personal toys, clothes, and furniture of ancient Egyptian King Tut are being carefully restored. The work is for a new display at the Grand Egyptian Museum later this year. I-24 News correspondent Lottie Balin has the preview.
Egypt's king, Tutankhamun, alive again. His belongings are undergoing a conservation process, and the artifacts will soon be displayed for the first time at the Grand Egyptian Museum.
The Golden King, which is how King Tutankhamun is referred to. His tomb is the only tomb to be discovered completely and fully intact. It has a wide range of different ancient pieces, fabrics, and ancient substances that show a clearly advanced method of craftsmanship and technology in pharaonic Egypt.
The ancient objects being restored include the Boy King's toy collection, a bird, a swan spinner, and a swan sitting on eggs.
These pieces were stored in the storage room of the Egyptian Museum in Tahrir Square since 1933. They remained in the storage rooms until 2013, when we started transporting the pieces from the storage room to the Restoration Center to prepare them for display.
Clothes, footwear, and furniture, which are believed to be made of gold or plated with layers of gold, are also included. The artifacts were found in the tomb of King Tut, who ruled Egypt as pharaoh for 10 years until his death at age 19 around 1324 BC. The king's belongings will go on display when part of the Grand Egyptian Museum opens later this year, ahead of its expected official launch in 2022.
That was Lottie Balin reporting. And finally tonight, ever wondered what life is like as a polar bear? Well, here's your chance. Point of view cameras show a day in the life of polar bears in the frozen tundra of Alaska. Cameras were attached to 10 animals over the course of several years to research their behavior and food intake. It's safe to say these bears were hungry, fighting over raw meat. While they may look cute and cuddly, they did growl a lot. And that's Clearcut. We would love to hear your comments. Feel free to reach out by writing to us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tal Henrik. I was in for Michelle McCory. She will be back here on Monday.